The Alpha King's pup hugged the wrong Omega, and he dropped to one knee, refusing to let go. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to Elena Hart. The morning air at Stonehall grounds carried the quiet tension of a place where hierarchy mattered more than kindness, and Elena Hart felt it the way she always did, like a pressure settling between her shoulders as she stood near the edge of the gathering. The courtyard stretched nearly the length of a football field, lined with pale stone pillars and banners that stirred lazily in the breeze, and every step closer to the center seemed reserved for those born with stronger sense and louder voices than hers. Elena kept her hands folded, posture respectful, eyes lowered just enough to avoid drawing attention, because experience had taught her that attention was rarely gentle for an Omega like her. Around her, polished shoes crossed the marble with confidence, measured in inches and yards that mapped an invisible boundary she was never meant to cross, and whispers floated past her ears, not loud enough to confront, but sharp enough to remind. She heard her name once, followed by a soft laugh, and she breathed through it the way she always did, steady and quiet, counting heartbeats the way some people counted steps. The royal guard stood near the raised platform, broad-shouldered and still, their presence a reminder that today was not an ordinary gathering but a formal appearance by the Alpha King himself, a moment meant to be flawless. Elena told herself she was only here to observe, to be useful if asked, to remain unseen, yet the sense of something waiting in the air refused to fade. Sunlight glanced off the stone, warm against her skin, and she noticed small details others ignored, the way the banners cast soft shadows, the way the sound of boots echoed and softened, the way the crowd subtly shifted, as if responding to a rhythm no one named. She felt it then, a change, a quiet ripple moving through the space like a held breath. From the corner of her vision, a small figure slipped past the careful lines of order, quick and curious, silver eyes bright, with the fearless focus only the young possessed. Elena's heart skipped, not with alarm but with instinctive concern, because no one else seemed to notice right away, and she knew how easily gentleness could be overlooked in a place built on strength. She did not move forward, not yet, but something in her softened, a familiar warmth in her chest that always arrived before she made a choice she could not explain. The crowd continued its low murmur, the guards remained poised, and Elena stayed where she was, unaware that the quiet moment she was stepping into would be the one that changed how this world saw her forever. Elena felt the shift before anyone spoke her name, a subtle tightening in the air that made conversations falter and smiles stiffen, and she knew without looking that attention had drifted toward her corner of the courtyard. She remained still, shoulders relaxed, chin slightly lowered, because standing out had never brought her anything good. A pair of Omegas near the center glanced back at her, then quickly looked away, their expressions careful in the way people became when they did not want to be associated with the wrong person. Elena recognized that look. It was the look of distance measured not in feet, but in rank. She adjusted her stance by a few inches, enough to make herself smaller, enough to remind herself that her place was here, at the edge, where she would not be noticed or blamed. The stone beneath her shoes was cool despite the sun, and she focused on that sensation, grounding herself as the murmur of voices resumed, lower now, as if everyone was speaking around a secret. Someone near the platform cleared their throat, and Elena caught fragments of conversation drifting past, remarks about decorum, about appearances, about how today needed to proceed without incident. No one addressed her directly, but she felt the unspoken warning settle like a weight. Stay where you are. Do not interfere. Do not matter. She had learned those rules early, learned how to be useful without being visible, kind without being credited, present without being chosen. As she stood there, she noticed how the space around her subtly emptied, how people adjusted their paths to avoid brushing too close, as if proximity itself carried risk. It would have hurt once, maybe, but now it was simply familiar, like an old ache that no longer surprised her. Elena drew a slow breath, the kind she had practiced when she was younger, counting 4 beats in and 4 beats out, reminding herself that she was safe, that she belonged to herself even if she belonged nowhere else. The sun climbed higher, casting longer lines of light across the courtyard, and the banners overhead shifted, their shadows moving like quiet waves. That was when she noticed the smallest detail, easy to miss if you were not looking for it. A pause in the crowd's rhythm, a brief gap opening where no one stepped forward. In that space, a soft sound reached her ears, not loud enough to draw alarm, just a curious exhale, followed by the gentle patter of movement against stone. Elena's eyes lifted despite herself, and she saw him clearly now, the young wolf pup with silver-gray fur and bright, searching eyes, standing alone where the paths of adults had parted. He was smaller than she had expected, not much bigger than a medium-sized dog, his posture uncertain, but his curiosity unmistakable. People noticed him then, finally, but they did not move toward him, not quickly, not easily, because reverence and fear held them in place. Elena felt the warmth in her chest return, stronger this time. Not urgency but recognition, the quiet pull she always felt toward those who needed calm rather than command. She did not step forward yet, aware of every gaze, every rule pressing against her ribs, but her hands loosened at her sides, fingers uncurling in a gesture she barely registered. The pup tilted his head, ears flicking, as if he had heard something no one else could, and his eyes found hers across the open space. For a moment, the noise of the gathering faded, and Elena forgot where she was, forgot who she was supposed to be, because all she saw was a young creature standing alone, looking for something gentle in a world that demanded strength. Elena did not move at first, because movement invited scrutiny, and scrutiny invited correction, and correction had shaped most of her life, but the pup did not seem to understand those rules, or perhaps he understood something older and simpler. He took a tentative step forward, then another, his paws quiet against the stone, each movement guided by curiosity rather than command. Elena felt every eye in the courtyard sharpen, felt the invisible lines of authority tighten, and she knew she should look away, should let someone stronger step in, someone with a title that made touch permissible. Instead, she remained where she was, breathing slow and steady, her gaze soft rather than fixed, offering presence without demand. The warmth in her chest spread gently, not overwhelming, just enough to remind her of who she was when no one was watching. The pup paused halfway, head tilting again as if weighing a choice, and Elena lowered herself carefully, bending at the knees until she was closer to his height. Careful not to rush, careful not to seem like she was reaching for something that did not belong to her. Around them, the gathering held its breath, measured not in seconds but in heartbeats, because no one had instructed the Alpha King's child to go there, to choose that space, to approach that Omega. Elena placed one hand lightly against her own knee, palm open, fingers relaxed, a gesture she had used countless times with frightened animals and anxious children, never thinking it would matter here. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady and calm, and she wondered briefly if he could hear it too. The pup took another step, then another, until the distance between them was no longer measured in yards but inches, and Elena felt the soft brush of his fur against her leg, tentative at first, then surer, as if he had decided something important. A soft sound escaped his throat, not a call for attention but an expression of comfort, and before Elena could second-guess herself, before fear could tighten her shoulders, he leaned fully into her, small body pressing close as if he had always belonged there. Elena froze for a fraction of a second, surprise flickering through her, but instinct followed, and she brought her arms around him slowly, not enclosing, not restraining, just offering support. His weight was light, warm, solid in a way that felt grounding rather than alarming, and she adjusted her balance, sitting back slightly, so he could rest more comfortably. The courtyard erupted in whispers then, sharp and urgent, voices overlapping with questions no one dared ask aloud. But Elena barely heard them, because the pup sighed, a deep, contented sound that vibrated gently against her chest, and something inside her eased in response. She did not stroke him, did not claim familiarity she had not earned. She simply held still, letting him choose the closeness, letting him decide when to pull away. The rules she had lived by all her life insisted this was a mistake, insisted that she should release him immediately, apologize, retreat. But the quiet certainty in the pup's posture told a different story, one written not in hierarchy, but in trust. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from fear, but from the unexpected relief of being chosen without having to prove anything, without having to be more than she was. She did not look up, did not seek permission from the crowd or the guards or the raised platform beyond them, because in that moment, all that mattered was the small, steady presence leaning into her, as if he had finally found the place he was meant to be. The moment stretched longer than Elena expected, long enough for the murmurs to thin into a fragile silence, and she became acutely aware of how still she was holding herself, how carefully she was breathing so as not to disturb the calm the pup had found. His weight settled more fully against her, trust given without question, and that trust felt heavier than any command she had ever been subject to. She could sense the shift around them even without looking, the way the guards adjusted their stances, the way conversations halted mid-thought, the way every line of attention bent inward toward the quiet center they now occupied. Elena's first instinct was to apologize, to gently ease the pup away and retreat before someone reminded her of boundaries she had never been allowed to forget. But when she shifted even slightly, the pup tightened his hold, small paws pressing closer, as if instinctively asking her to stay. She froze again, heart thudding, unsure whether she was protecting him or whether he was protecting her from something unseen. The warmth of his presence seeped through her clothes, steady and reassuring, and she focused on that sensation, letting it anchor her as the weight of awareness grew. A guard cleared, his throat somewhere nearby, the sound sharp in the quiet, and Elena felt the familiar spike of anxiety ripple through her, but no one stepped forward, no command was given, no order cut through the moment. Instead, there was only the sound of measured footsteps approaching from behind the ring of onlookers, slow and deliberate, each step falling with purpose. Elena did not turn her head, but she felt the air change, pressure building like a storm that had not yet broken, and she knew without being told who was coming closer. The Alpha King's presence carried a gravity she had felt before from a distance, something that made the ground seem more solid beneath her and the sky more watchful above. And now that presence was drawing nearer, step by step. The pup lifted his head briefly, ears flicking, then relaxed again, choosing her once more, and that choice sent a quiet tremor through Elena's chest. She realized then that this was no longer about where she stood or how little she mattered in the eyes of the crowd, because whatever came next would be shaped by the simple truth of what was already happening. The footsteps stopped a few feet away, close enough that Elena could sense the Alpha King's attention settle on them fully, focused and intent, and the silence deepened, thick with anticipation. She felt exposed in a way she never had before, not because she was seen as lesser, but because she was seen at all, standing at the center of something she had not sought but could not undo. Elena slowly lifted her gaze, careful and respectful, meeting the space just below where she knew the Alpha King stood, unwilling to assume permission she had not been granted, yet unwilling to look away from what she was now part of. Her arms remained steady around the pup, neither tightening nor releasing, honoring his choice above her fear. Around them, time seemed to pause, measured not in minutes or seconds, but in the collective awareness of hundreds of witnesses, each one sensing that something fundamental had shifted. Elena swallowed, throat dry, and waited, understanding that whatever judgment came would arrive now, not with raised voices or force, but with the quiet authority of a man whose presence alone could change the shape of a moment, and she hoped, with a steadiness she did not know, she possessed, that he could see what his child already had. Elena felt the Alpha King's attention settle fully, a presence that did not press down but drew everything into focus. And for the first time she realized how quiet the courtyard truly was, as if hundreds of people had learned at once how to breathe carefully. She sensed him move closer, not rushed, not hesitant, each step deliberate, and though she kept her gaze lowered in respect, she could feel the weight of his regard on her and on the small form resting against her chest. The pup shifted slightly, adjusting his position, then relaxed again with a soft sound that carried farther than Elena expected, and that sound seemed to break something open in the space around them. A ripple of reaction moved through the onlookers, not loud enough to be called a gasp, but strong enough to be felt, Because the Alpha King's son had never shown such ease in public, never chosen comfort over caution, never lingered in the arms of someone without standing or title. Elena's heart beat faster, not with panic now, but with a strange steadiness, as if her body had accepted that there was no turning back from this moment. She felt the Alpha King stop directly in front of her, close enough that she could sense the warmth of him, the subtle shift of air that accompanied his stillness, and the silence stretched again, tight with expectation. Elena's fingers curled slightly against the pup's back, not to hold him tighter, but to reassure him that she was still there, that she had not changed her mind. The pup responded by leaning into her once more, head tucked beneath her chin, and the simplicity of that trust sent a quiet ache through her chest. Around them, the guards remained motionless, waiting for a signal that did not come, and the crowd held its collective breath. Elena became aware of how exposed she was, kneeling on stone in plain clothing, an omega with no claim to attention. Yet here she was, at the center of it all, because someone innocent had chosen her without knowing what it meant. The Alpha King spoke then, his voice low and controlled, not raised to command, but carried clearly enough that those nearest could hear, and Elena felt the sound resonate through her more than the words themselves. He said his son's name, gently, a quiet acknowledgement rather than a reprimand, and the pup stirred but did not pull away. Elena sensed the Alpha King's surprise beneath his composure, not shock, but something closer to recognition, as if he were witnessing a truth he had not expected to find so plainly revealed. She lifted her eyes at last, meeting his gaze for the first time, and what she saw there was not anger or accusation, but careful attention, sharp and searching, weighing not her rank but the moment itself. The seconds stretched, measured in heartbeats, and Elena realized that no one was going to step in to separate them, no rule was being enforced, no boundary reclaimed. Instead, the Alpha King shifted his stance, lowering himself slightly, bringing himself closer to their level, and that simple change sent another wave of reaction through the courtyard, because kings did not adjust themselves for omegas, not in public, not without reason. Elena's breath caught, not because she feared what he might do, but because she felt the weight of what he was choosing not to do, and in that restraint, she sensed the beginning of something that could not be undone. The Alpha King remained lowered, not kneeling yet, but close enough that Elena could see the fine details of his expression, the careful restraint in his eyes, the way his attention moved not only to her, but to the quiet certainty of his son resting against her. He studied the pup first, noting how completely relaxed he was, how his breathing had slowed, how his small body fit against Elena, as if it had learned her shape by instinct. The Alpha King had seen his child wary with elders, restless in formal spaces, alert even in moments of supposed safety, and this ease was unfamiliar enough to feel like a revelation unfolding in real time. Elena sensed his gaze return to her, not weighing her worth but seeking understanding, and she felt an unexpected calm settle in her chest, as if the moment itself were holding her steady. The Alpha King spoke again, quietly this time, not for the crowd but for the space between them, asking her name, and Elena answered without lifting her voice, each word careful and clear, because she knew how easily silence could be mistaken for fear. When she spoke, the pup stirred, pressing closer, and the Alpha King's attention sharpened, recognizing the connection not as coincidence, but as response. He reached out slowly, not touching yet, his hand hovering near his son's shoulder, giving him the choice, and the pup acknowledged him with a small glance before settling again, unbothered. That simple decision carried more meaning than any declaration, and the Alpha King felt it land with quiet force. Around them, the onlookers shifted, some leaning forward, others retreating instinctively, because what they were witnessing did not fit within ceremony or rank. Elena noticed the way the Alpha King's posture changed, how the tension in his shoulders eased, how his voice softened when he addressed his son, reassurance woven into every syllable. She realized then that this was not a test she had failed or passed, but a truth that had revealed itself without asking permission. The Alpha King straightened slightly, eyes lifting to scan the faces around them, and the effect was immediate, the courtyard responding to his attention like a held breath finally released. Yet his focus returned to Elena just as quickly, and she felt the weight of that regard not as pressure but as recognition, something steady and intent. He asked how she had approached his son, not accusing, simply seeking understanding, and Elena answered honestly, explaining that she had not called or reached, that she had only made space. The Alpha King listened, truly listened, and something unreadable flickered across his features, because space, not command, was something his world rarely offered. The pup shifted again, adjusting his position, small paws resting against Elena's arm, and the Alpha King watched the movement closely, committing it to memory, because he understood then that this was not about obedience or scent or protocol. This was about trust freely given, about safety found where none was expected. Elena felt the moment deepen, the edges of it sharpening into something that would not fade when the crowd dispersed, and she wondered, briefly, how her life had narrowed so quietly until this instant widened it beyond anything she had imagined. The Alpha King lowered himself further, one knee touching the stone at last, not in submission to the crowd, but in acknowledgement of what stood before him, and the courtyard seemed to tilt around them, because kings did not meet moments like this halfway, and yet here he was, choosing to do exactly that. The stone was cool beneath the Alpha King's knee, a detail Elena noticed with surprising clarity, because it grounded the moment in something real and undeniable, and she realized that everyone around them was seeing it too. A king choosing to lower himself was not a gesture meant for ceremony, and the meaning of it rippled outward, carried on the quiet that followed. Elena felt the pup's body relax further, as if the change in his father's posture confirmed something he had already known, and she adjusted her hold slightly, to keep him comfortable, movements slow and careful, aware that every small motion now carried weight. The Alpha King's gaze lifted to hers again, steady and searching, and when he spoke, his voice was low but clear, carrying just far enough to reach the edges of the gathering without losing its intimacy. He told her not to move, not as a command, but as reassurance, and the words settled into Elena with unexpected warmth. She realized then that fear had slipped away somewhere along the way, replaced by a quiet resolve she did not remember choosing. The pup shifted his head, resting it more securely against her shoulder, and the Alpha King reached out at last, placing his hand gently against his son's back, careful not to disturb him. The contact was brief but deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of trust that passed between father and child, and Elena felt herself included in that exchange in a way she had never experienced before. The Alpha King spoke again, this time addressing those gathered, his tone calm and measured, explaining that his son had made a choice and that choice would be respected. The words were simple, but their effect was immediate, cutting through uncertainty and expectation alike, because no one present could argue with the authority of a king who stood by his child. Elena felt the attention of the crowd shift, not toward judgment but toward acceptance, tentative at first, then steadying, as if the world were recalibrating around a new truth. She remained kneeling, posture straight but relaxed, not because she was told to, but because it felt right, because this was where she was meant to be in this moment. The Alpha King turned back to her, expression thoughtful, and thanked her, not for obedience or restraint, but for kindness, spoken plainly, without embellishment. The word landed with quiet force, because kindness was not something she had ever been praised for in public, and she felt a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. She answered simply, saying she had done nothing special, and the Alpha King considered her response before nodding, as if confirming something to himself. The pup stirred again, then settled, content and secure, and the Alpha King's hand lingered briefly, a silent promise of protection that extended beyond his son. Elena sensed that this moment was not an ending but a turning point, one that would echo beyond the courtyard and into places she could not yet imagine. As the Alpha King began to rise, one knee lifting from the stone, he did not immediately reclaim his full height, pausing instead at her level, meeting her gaze with an intensity that spoke of decisions forming, paths aligning. The crowd remained silent, aware that something irrevocable had been set in motion, and Elena held her breath, understanding that her life, once defined by edges and shadows, had just stepped into a light she could no longer step out of. The Alpha King completed his rise but did not step away, remaining close enough that Elena could still sense his presence without looking up, and that closeness carried a reassurance that settled her nerves rather than stirred them. The courtyard began to breathe again, not loudly, but with the subtle shifts of people adjusting their weight, reassessing what they had witnessed, understanding that something fundamental had changed without a single decree being read aloud. Elena felt the pup stir in her arms, stretching slightly, then settling once more with a small sound of contentment, and she smiled despite herself, the expression soft and unguarded because she had forgotten how to hide it. The Alpha King noticed that smile, not because it was meant for him, but because it reflected something true, and he found himself holding on to that detail, committing it to memory alongside the weight of his son resting peacefully where he had chosen to be. He spoke again, not to command movement, but to ease it, telling the gathered wolves that the formalities could wait, that the moment required patience rather than urgency. Guards relaxed at last, lowering their alert stances, and the tension that had once pressed in from every direction softened into something closer to curiosity and respect. Elena slowly adjusted her posture, careful to support the pup as she shifted from kneeling to a more comfortable position, and the Alpha King watched closely, ready to assist but choosing restraint, trusting her instincts as his son clearly did. When she settled, the pup let out a long, satisfied breath, and Elena felt a quiet laugh rise in her chest, surprising her with its ease. The Alpha King met her eyes again, and this time there was no searching, no weighing. Only a clear understanding that whatever questions might follow would not erase what had already been proven. He asked if she was comfortable, the question simple and direct, and Elena nodded, answering honestly, her voice steady because it felt safe to be honest here. The Alpha King inclined his head in acknowledgement, a small gesture that carried more meaning than any public praise, and he placed his hand briefly over his heart, a sign of respect that drew murmurs from the crowd, because such gestures were rarely offered outside the most formal of bonds. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being honored rather than overlooked, and she focused on the pup again, grounding herself in his warmth. Around them, whispers spread, no longer sharp or dismissive, but filled with wonder, as people tried to reconcile what they had seen with what they believed about power and worth. The Alpha King addressed his council with a glance rather than words, and they responded immediately, understanding his intent without needing instruction, stepping back to give the moment space. Elena realized then that she was no longer standing at the edge of the gathering, no longer invisible, and the realization did not frighten her as she had always assumed it would. Instead, it felt like standing in sunlight after a long winter, unfamiliar but welcome. The Alpha King spoke her name once more, clearly, ensuring it carried across the space, not as an announcement, but as recognition, and Elena felt the sound of it anchor her to this new reality. The pup shifted again, eyes fluttering open briefly before closing once more, content and secure, and the Alpha King's expression softened at the sight, a father's relief clear and unguarded. In that moment, Elena understood that whatever came next would not be built on obligation or fear, but on a truth already revealed, one chosen freely by the smallest voice present, and affirmed by the strongest, and she held on to that understanding as the courtyard slowly, respectfully, made room for what was yet to come. The Alpha King let the silence settle fully before he spoke again, allowing the weight of the moment to anchor itself in memory, because he understood that what endured was not volume, but meaning. He stepped closer, closing the last measured distance between himself and Elena, and for the first time since he had approached, he reached not for his son but for her, his hand stopping just short of contact, giving her the choice he had given the child. Elena felt the gesture more than she saw it, an invitation rather than an order, and she nodded once, subtle but certain, acknowledging trust with trust. His fingers closed gently around her wrist, not to restrain but to steady, and the contact sent a quiet awareness through her, not overwhelming, simply present, like a promise spoken without words. The pup stirred at the change, eyes opening briefly, silver gaze flicking to his father before returning to Elena, satisfied, and that small approval seemed to seal what had already been decided. The Alpha King drew in a breath, then lowered himself once more, this time fully, one knee returning to the stone, his posture deliberate and unmistakable, a choice that rippled through the courtyard with the force of truth. The certainty in his tone left no room for doubt. Elena swallowed, voice trembling but clear as she thanked him, because gratitude was all she could offer in return for something that felt far larger than permission. The pup shifted, pressing his head against her collarbone, a quiet reminder of how this had begun, and the Alpha King's expression softened as he watched them, understanding fully now that power did not always announce itself with force. He rose at last, keeping Elena close as he stood, ensuring that the transition did not separate them, and the crowd instinctively stepped back, creating space rather than closing in. Sunlight broke through the banners above, catching on stone and fur alike, and Elena felt its warmth settle over her, no longer something she observed from the edges, but something she stood within. The Alpha King looked down at her one final time before turning to address those gathered, his voice carrying with ease as he declared the gathering concluded, formalities postponed in favor of what mattered. As movement resumed around them, measured and respectful, Elena realized that nothing would ever return to what it had been, and she did not want it to. The Alpha King guided her forward, his son still secure in her arms, and with each step, she felt the past loosen its grip, replaced by a future unfolding one deliberate choice at a time, a future that had begun not with command or ceremony, but with a simple act of trust that had changed everything.